He thought he had simply helped the girls, but he didn't expect who would knock on his door a few days later. But what their millionaire mother did shocked everyone. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The sound of a lone rooster crowing split the stillness of the dawn as the sky above the Colorado hills blushed with faint streaks of lavender and gold. Elias Carter stood on the front porch of his modest wooden house, mug of black coffee cradled in his calloused hands, eyes sweeping across the land he had worked with quiet devotion for more than a decade. The fields stretched wide, bordered by timber fences he'd mended with his own 2 hands, and beyond them the tree line rose like a wall of memory and silence. The morning air was brisk, hinting at an early autumn, and the wind smelled faintly of pine, dew, and the smoke that still lingered from last night's fire in the hearth. Inside the house, his son Marcus was still asleep, curled up under a quilt that had once belonged to Elias's late wife. The boy, only 7 years old, had his mother's eyes and his father's unshakable calm, and even in sleep he clutched his battered toy truck with the intensity of a child raised in a world where nothing came easily. Elias took another sip of coffee and closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the silence. This land was not grand, nor particularly profitable. The cattle grazed slow and lean, the soil yielded what it could, and the fences always needed fixing. But it was honest work, the kind that burned into your bones and left your hands scarred but your conscience clear. After Rosalind passed 3 years ago, Elias had found refuge in the rhythm of chores and the presence of his boy. Grief had not left him. It never did, but the land and the child gave him reason enough to get up each morning and face another sunrise. The screen door creaked behind him. "Daddy," came a sleepy voice. He turned. Marcus, barefoot and tousle-headed, stood rubbing his eyes. "You're up early," Elias said, placing the mug down and offering a hand. Marcus yawned. "Couldn't sleep. I heard the coyotes again. They were far off. Ain't nothing near the house." The boy nodded, accepting the answer with the quiet trust that marked their bond. Together, they stepped off the porch and walked toward the barn, the gravel crunching softly beneath their boots. Elias passed Marcus a small pail as they entered the dim interior of the barn, dust motes catching in the slanted beams of sunlight. "You take care of the chickens," Elias said. "I'll check the fence line and bring back the eggs." Marcus set off with determination, and Elias watched him for a moment, pride and worry coiled tight in his chest. The boy was strong, but the world had a way of wearing down the good ones early. He just wanted to give him a foundation solid enough to stand on when the storms came. The morning passed in quiet routine. By the time the sun had risen fully, Elias had repaired 2 sagging fence posts and freed a calf that had gotten itself tangled in a corner of the paddock. He returned to the house sweaty and dusty, Marcus trailing behind him with a basket full of eggs and a wide grin on his face. "6 today," the boy said proudly. "Then we'll have us a feast," Elias replied. They cooked breakfast together, scrambled eggs, cornbread, and coffee for him, milk for Marcus, and sat at the wooden kitchen table, the walls lined with family photos and shelves of canned preserves. Elias allowed himself a rare smile. These were the good moments. The forecast had said rain. By midday, the sky had started to change. Clouds rolled in from the west, thick and gray, and the air took on that unmistakable scent of approaching storm. Elias went about his afternoon with increased urgency, securing the tool shed, checking the roof of the barn, moving the tractor under cover. He was returning from the field when he noticed something out of place along the far tree line. At first, it was just a flicker, a glimpse of movement against the backdrop of pine and cedar. He narrowed his eyes and stepped off the path, heading toward the sound. As he got closer, the wind picked up, rustling the underbrush and carrying with it a sound that stopped him cold. Crying, faint, high-pitched, and desperate. He moved faster now, instinct overriding hesitation. The crying grew clearer, and then he saw them. Two small figures huddled beneath a cluster of low branches near the old dry creek bed. Twin girls, no more than 6 or 7, soaked to the skin, their dresses clinging to their limbs, their eyes wide with fear. One had her arms around the other, trembling. Elias froze. He had seen many things on this land: coyotes prowling the outskirts, wild deer crossing through his fields, even a bear once, but never this. Never 2 lost, pale-skinned girls out in the woods, alone. He approached slowly, voice low and steady. "Hey there. You all right?" The girls didn't answer. The one with darker hair tightened her grip on the other. Their cheeks were streaked with dirt, and their shoes, delicate, impractical things, were caked in mud. They looked like porcelain dolls abandoned in the forest. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Elias said, kneeling down. "My name's Elias. I got a warm house just a little ways from here. You don't gotta say nothing. I just want to help." Still no response, but they didn't run either. That was something. He removed his jacket and held it out. After a long pause, the darker-haired girl took it. She didn't speak, but she let him lift her into his arms. The other followed, clinging to his side. They were ice cold. Elias carried them back to the house, his thoughts racing. Who were they? Where had they come from? There had been no vehicles, no signs of recent passage near the boundary road. And the girls themselves, so small, so pale, seemed like they had been dropped into the woods by some cruel hand. Marcus ran to the porch when he saw them. "Who? Help me grab towels, son. They're freezing." They got the girls inside, wrapped in blankets placed by the fire. Elias brewed tea and heated soup while Marcus, silent and wide-eyed, brought his favorite blanket and offered his toy truck, which they took with tentative fingers. Still no names, no explanation. Elias tried the phone. No signal. The storm was starting, rain now pelting the windows, wind moaning against the corners of the house. They weren't going anywhere tonight. He let the girls eat in silence, noting every detail. The way they watched the door, the flinches at every crack of thunder, the way they never strayed far from each other. One of them whispered something to the other in a language he didn't recognize. After dinner, Elias made up a bed in the loft. Marcus insisted on sleeping nearby. "I don't want them to be scared," he said. That night, Elias sat by the fire long after the children were asleep. The wind howled outside, and the flames cast restless shadows across the wooden floor. His mind churned. Logic told him to report this, to drive to the station at dawn, to let the authorities handle it. But something deep in his gut resisted. These children hadn't wandered here by chance, and something in their eyes told him they weren't just lost. They were running from something. He finished his coffee, stood, and looked toward the loft. From the shadows, Marcus's voice floated down. "Are they going to stay with us, Daddy?" Elias didn't answer, not yet, but the question stayed with him all night. Morning crept in slowly, dragging with it the damp remnants of the storm. The rain had passed, but the clouds still hovered low over the hills, casting a sullen gray light over the land. Elias stirred before the sun was fully up, his body aching in the familiar way that came from years of early labor. He lay still for a moment, listening. The house was silent except for the occasional pop of the cooling hearth, and the slow, steady drip of rainwater from the eaves. He pulled on his boots, tied them tight, and moved through the house with quiet precision. He passed by the loft, glancing up at the 3 small forms tangled in blankets. The girls were huddled together under the quilt, and Marcus, curled nearby, had his hand resting near one of theirs. That gesture, a small boy's instinctive offer of protection, tightened something in Elias's chest. He turned away and headed to the kitchen. As the smell of coffee and cornbread began to fill the air, Elias heard small feet padding across the wooden floor. One of the girls stood in the doorway, clutching the hem of an oversized t-shirt that hung to her knees. Her hair was still damp from the night before, strands clinging to her cheek. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed every move he made. "You hungry?" Elias asked gently, keeping his voice low and calm. "Got some warm bread here. Bit of butter, too." She nodded, barely perceptible, and stepped closer. He placed a small plate in front of her and poured a cup of warm milk. She took it, sat carefully at the table, and began to eat with small, delicate bites, as though the food might disappear at any moment. The other girl and Marcus came in soon after. Marcus greeted Elias with a quiet, "Mornin', Daddy," then sat beside the strangers as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Elias watched the way the girls interacted, never speaking aloud, but communicating with glances, little nods, and soft touches. It wasn't just sisterly closeness, it was survival. They were bound together like 2 halves of something fragile and broken. After breakfast, Elias gave Marcus a task to occupy him, collecting kindling from the woodshed, and then sat with the girls in the front room. The fire had gone out, but the coals still glowed. He stoked it back to life slowly as he spoke. "I don't know your names," he said. "Don't know where you came from or what happened, but I want you to know you're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you." One of the girls, the one with the slightly sharper jawline, looked at him for the first time with something close to curiosity. She reached for a crayon that Marcus had left on the floor and began to draw on the back of a grocery receipt. When she was done, she held it out to him. It was a picture, simple, childlike. A house, a son, a man, a boy, and 2 girls standing outside the door. Elias took it, studied it carefully, then he looked up and met her eyes. "That your way of saying thank you?" She didn't nod, but she didn't look away either. He cleared his throat and stood. "Until we learn otherwise, I'll call you Lily and Rosie. Hope that's all right." They didn't protest. It would do for now. Days passed in a quiet rhythm. Elias kept the girls close to home, unsure what else to do. The phones were still down, the roads muddy and treacherous. He told himself he'd drive into town when the weather cleared, but something kept holding him back. A voice in his gut that warned him not to let these children go, not until he knew for certain they were going back to safety, not just back to wealth or name. The girls slowly adjusted to the household. They followed Marcus everywhere, mimicking his chores and games. Marcus taught them how to feed the chickens and where to find the sweetest apples from the tree behind the barn. He showed them how to chase frogs in the creek and how to whistle through a blade of grass. Rosie, Elias wasn't sure which name belonged to which, but it didn't seem to matter, became attached to a stray kitten that had taken up residence in the barn. She carried it everywhere, wrapping it in an old dish towel like a baby. Lily was quieter, more watchful, and often trailed Elias as he worked, handing him tools and watching his hands with a kind of reverence. She never spoke, but she nodded when he explained how the tractor worked or why the corn needed a second tilling. It wasn't long before the house began to feel different. Not louder, not chaotic, but fuller. as though the walls themselves were breathing deeper. Marcus smiled more. Elias laughed, once genuinely, when Rosie fell face first into a basket of laundry and came up covered in socks. But under the warmth and newness, there was tension too. Questions that remained unanswered. The girls had not said a word about where they'd come from. They hadn't asked to leave. They hadn't mentioned parents, or home, or anything at all before Elias found them. He noticed how they flinched at distant thunder, how they froze at the sound of a car backfiring in the distance, how Rosie shrunk away from Elias once when he raised his voice, not in anger at her, but at a stubborn goat that kicked over a water trough. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong in their lives, something deeper than getting lost in the woods. He tried again one afternoon, gently. "You two ever have a dog at your old house?" he asked as they sat on the porch, whittling small sticks. Lily glanced at Rosie. Rosie looked away. "What about a swing set? Maybe a trampoline?" Silence. Elias sighed. "All right, then." That night, he stayed up long after the children had gone to bed, sitting at the kitchen table with a worn envelope and pen. He wrote a letter to the sheriff's office, explaining that 2 young girls had turned up on his land after the storm, that they were safe and unharmed, but wouldn't say who they were. He gave his address and phone number and placed the envelope near the door, planning to send it with the next postman who came up the hill. But the next morning, when the sun rose and the air turned warm and golden, he left the letter where it was. The girls were out in the field with Marcus, picking wildflowers and chasing dragonflies. They ran, without fear, laughing. Elias stood in the doorway and watched them for a long time. He told himself he'd send the letter tomorrow. On the 4th day, something shifted. Marcus had gone to bed early, worn out from a long day helping Elias clear brush. Elias sat with the girls by the fireplace, sipping tea. Rosie was drawing again, and Lily was plucking softly at a banjo Elias had rescued from a thrift store years ago. The notes were aimless, but gentle. Then Lily looked up at him and spoke for the first time. "My name's not Lily." Elias blinked, startled. "It's Clara," she said. "Her name is June." He set his mug down carefully. "All right," he said. "Thank you for telling me." She looked back down at the banjo. "We didn't mean to run away. We were just scared." "What happened?" he asked, voice quiet. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't remember everything. Just yelling, glass breaking, and then we were outside, and we kept walking." Rosie, June, looked up at her sister, then nodded. "There was a man, not our daddy. He was mad." Elias's stomach tightened. "Your parents, do they know where you are?" "I don't think so," Clara said. "Mama was gone. And the man, he was chasing us." Elias didn't ask more. They were trembling now, voices fading. He reached out, rested a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. "You're safe here," he said again. They leaned into him, and he held them close, wondering how he would ever let them go. That night, Marcus came to him while he was locking up the barn. "Daddy," he said, voice serious, "are they going to stay forever?" Elias looked down at his son. The boy's face was hopeful but worried. "I don't know, son. I really don't." "I want them to." Elias pulled him into a hug. "We'll see, one day at a time." But in his heart, he already knew. These girls had brought something back to their lives, something that had been missing since Rosalind died. A sound, a warmth, a pulse. It felt like family, and Elias wasn't sure he could give that up, not again. The sun rose slow and deliberate, casting long golden streaks across the wide fields and over the rolling green hills that framed the Carter property. The morning mist clung low to the ground, curling around the fence posts and grazing cattle like a gentle ghost, as if the earth itself didn't want to fully wake from sleep. In the warmth of the kitchen, Elias stood at the stove flipping cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, while the smell of fresh eggs, brewed coffee, and wood smoke settled deep into the bones of the house. Clara and June sat at the table with Marcus, each with a mug of warm milk clasped in their small hands. Marcus was telling them a story about the time he caught a snake near the chicken coop and made it a pet for almost 2 days before Elias discovered it, and screamed louder than Marcus had ever heard him before. The girls laughed, really laughed, and Elias turned slightly at the sound of it. He didn't say anything, but his smile was subtle and real. He served breakfast, and they all ate together, the kind of quiet, content meal that only comes when no one is in a rush to be anywhere else. It felt natural now, the 4 of them seated around the table, as though Clara and June had always been there, as if they belonged to the rhythm of this place. The only reminder that this wasn't their home by blood or name was the way they sometimes went silent without warning, their eyes drifting far off and their hands tightening around spoons or cups. Elias had planned to go into town that day. He'd been putting it off long enough. The roads had dried and the truck was gassed and ready. He knew that eventually someone would come looking, or questions would be asked. He had told himself over and over that it was the right thing to do. But that morning, after the dishes were done and the children had scattered to the backyard to chase each other through the tall grass, Elias found himself staring at the letter he had written days ago. It was still on the mantel, unsent. Something pulled at him, something beyond duty, something deeper than obligation. It wasn't just about doing what the law required. It was about doing what was right. And what was right wasn't so simple anymore. He stepped outside and leaned against the railing of the porch. The girls were chasing Marcus near the orchard, their laughter carried on the breeze like music. Clara had flowers tangled in her hair. June wore Marcus's old overalls, far too big, rolled up at the ankles. They looked happy. More than happy. They looked free. Elias let his head rest back against the wood siding, his eyes closing briefly. It had been so long since the house felt this alive. He didn't hear the old radio inside crackle to life until the wind shifted and carried the sound out the open door. Static first, then a sudden sharp voice, WCRL News, the same channel he always left running in the background when he worked. Authorities continued to investigate the disappearance of twin daughters belonging to prominent hotel magnate Amelia Duval. Clara and June Duval, age 6, were last seen with their nanny 4 days ago after a family retreat in the mountains. The nanny's vehicle was discovered overturned off a remote logging road. The nanny was pronounced dead at the scene. The girls were not in the vehicle. Miss Duval has made a public plea for information regarding their whereabouts. The rest of the report dissolved into the roar of blood in Elias's ears. He stood motionless, heart thudding so loud he could barely hear anything else. He reached inside and turned the volume down, afraid the girls might hear. But it was too late. Clara was standing in the doorway. She didn't say a word, but her eyes told him everything. She had heard enough. June appeared next, eyes wide, her small hand clutching her sister's. Elias stepped forward slowly, lowering himself to one knee in front of them. "You knew," Clara said, her voice not angry, not scared, just tired. "I suspected," Elias answered honestly. "Didn't have the full picture till now." The girls looked at each other, then back at him. "Are you going to send us back?" June asked. He shook his head slowly. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but not until I know you'll be safe." Clara whispered. "He yelled at her, the nanny. He told her we were a problem. He said our mama didn't know how to raise us. He said we needed structure. Then we heard the crash. I don't remember after that." June pressed her face into Clara's shoulder. Clara's mouth trembled, but she stayed upright, brave. Elias wrapped both arms around them and held them tight. That night, after putting the children to bed, Elias sat on the porch with a heavy silence for company. The stars blinked above, and the moon hung low, casting silver light across the fields. The knowledge of who the girls were, who they truly were, had not changed what he felt. But it had changed what he feared. He couldn't keep them hidden forever. Amelia Duval. He knew the name. Everyone did. Wealth, power, status. A woman who had built an empire and who now had the entire country looking for her daughters. And yet, Clara and June had run, not from her it seemed, but from someone close to her, maybe even someone in her inner circle. That man, the one Clara had spoken of. Elias didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, he drove into town. He left the kids with his neighbor, Mrs. Kennerly, an elderly widow who made jam and spoke to her cats more than to people. She didn't ask questions. She saw the look on Elias's face and simply nodded. He took the back roads into Stillwater, the nearest real town with a sheriff's office and a library and a diner that served the best pie in 5 counties. He stopped first at the post office, picked up his mail, 3 weeks' worth, and leafed through it absently. A few bills, a catalog, and a bulletin from the sheriff's department. Missing child alert. 2 faces stared up at him from the grainy photo. Clara and June. He folded the bulletin and placed it in his coat pocket. At the library, he used one of the public computers to look up Amelia Duval. The headlines were relentless. Missing heirs, accidental death of nanny, conspiracy theories, speculation. A few grainy surveillance images showed Amelia being rushed through an airport. No details about the man Clara had mentioned. No mention of foul play. He printed what he could and left. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taggart had known Elias for a long time. They weren't friends, but they respected each other. Elias had once helped Taggart locate a missing hiker during a snowstorm. That counted for something. Elias didn't tell him everything. He said he'd seen something unusual, maybe a clue. A couple of kids wandering near his property a few days back, but they'd run before he could help. Just wanted to make sure it got logged. Taggart listened, took notes, asked a few polite questions. "If they show up again," he said, "you call us right away." Elias nodded. He left the office and walked back to his truck with the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing against his shoulders. When he got home, the kids were asleep on the porch swing, curled together under a blanket with Marcus's arms wrapped protectively around them. Elias stood there for a long time, watching the rise and fall of their breathing, feeling something inside him split clean in 2. He couldn't pretend anymore. These were Amelia Duval's daughters, but they were also children who had run for a reason. Children who had found a kind of peace here, on his land, in his home. He couldn't turn them in. Not yet. Not without knowing more. Not without understanding what exactly they were returning to. The next day, Clara came to him as he worked in the barn. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. He put down the shovel and crouched to meet her eyes. "No," he said, "you're not in trouble, but I need to know everything you remember." And so she told him, bit by bit, about the retreat house in the woods, about the man with the sharp voice who wasn't their father but acted like he owned everything, about how their mother was always gone, how the nanny had been kind, how the crash had come after the argument, how she and June had climbed out of the wreckage and kept walking. "I think Mama doesn't know we're gone," Clara said finally. "I think that man lied to her." Elias exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a case of a frightened child exaggerating a bad experience. This was something deeper, more dangerous. He didn't know yet how to find Amelia Duval, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let those girls go back to a place that broke them. Not without a fight. The sterile white walls of the office offered no comfort. The windows, floor to ceiling and overlooking the downtown skyline, let in the sharp Colorado sunlight that spilled across the pristine surface of the desk like a spotlight in an interrogation room. Amelia Duval sat perfectly still behind that desk, her tailored blazer unbuttoned, her hands motionless atop a leather folder. Only her eyes betrayed her. Their usual steely glint dulled, the whites tinged with red from nights without sleep. The voices around her seemed muffled, as if filtered through thick glass. Her legal counsel spoke in clipped tones, given updates. Her publicist checked notes and timed statements. Her chief of operations hovered by the door, waiting for instructions, but Amelia heard none of it. Not really. The words "no confirmed sightings," "vehicle recovered," and "nanny declared deceased" played on repeat in her mind like a broken record. Her daughters were missing. 4 days ago, they'd gone up into the mountains with Teresa, their full-time nanny and the only adult in the household Amelia had ever trusted with her children. She was gentle, warm, always singing in soft Spanish to calm the girls. Clara and June adored her. The trip had been Amelia's idea, a reward for finishing the school year early, a chance for them to get some air away from the flashing bulbs, the schedule, the boardroom. She'd intended to join them, but a late-breaking deal in Hong Kong had pulled her away. Just 48 hours, she told herself, 48 hours, and then she'd meet them there. She never made it. The call came late at night. Car off the road, nanny dead, girls nowhere in sight. In the hours that followed, Amelia's world, so meticulously arranged, began to collapse. The press was merciless. Her company's board issued statements urging her to take a leave of absence to focus on her family. Police reporters circled like vultures. Her ex-husband, from wherever he was hiding in the French Riviera, sent a one-line message. "Hope you're enjoying the legacy you wanted so badly." But none of that mattered. Not now. Nothing did but Clara and June. "Miss Duval," her assistant said cautiously. "Detective Harriman is on the line again." "Tell him I'll call him back," she said, not moving. "You said that an hour ago." Amelia's fingers twitched. Then she pushed back from the desk, stood, and crossed to the window. Below, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm. Cars, commuters, lives continuing without pause. No one down there knew what it was to wake in a cold sweat, reaching for 2 empty beds. No one knew how many nights she'd gone to sleep whispering her daughters' names like a prayer. "Get my driver," she said, "now." "Where should he take you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to her private suite, changed into jeans and boots, and pulled her hair back into a braid with trembling hands. She left her makeup on the dresser. The woman who usually faced the world with perfect eyeliner and sculpted cheeks wasn't going out today. When the elevator doors closed behind her, she didn't feel fear. She felt something closer to clarity. Hours later, far from the glass towers and leather boardrooms, Amelia sat in the passenger seat of her SUV, her hands clenched into fists in her lap, as the vehicle bumped along a narrow country road. Her private investigator, a grizzled man named Bellamy, who had been with her family since her father's era, drove without comment. He knew better than to speak unless she asked. "You're sure it was this way?" she asked at last. He nodded. The tire tracks from Teresa's vehicle ended about 3 miles back. They match a minor road that cuts through this region. No traffic cameras, no service towers. We lost them there. But a few days ago, someone in this area bought a large supply of food and children's clothes, paid cash, didn't give a name. Amelia stared out the window at the forest pressing in on both sides. Somewhere out here, among trees and old fences and skies so big they swallowed the world, her daughters had vanished. "We've alerted the media, the sheriff's office, even local schools," Bellamy continued, "but no one's come forward." "Because they're scared," Amelia murmured, "or because they're guilty." She shot him a sharp look. "Don't say that. I don't mean the girls, ma'am. I mean whoever's got them. If they were innocent, they'd have come forward by now." The road curved suddenly and opened into a clearing. A modest farm sat at its center, a wooden house with a wide porch, a barn with a slanted roof, and fields that stretched like worn fabric across the land. A few cows grazed in the distance. Chickens pecked in the dirt near the steps. A small boy sat on the porch swing with 2 girls curled beside him. Amelia's breath caught. She was out of the car before it had stopped moving. "Clara! June!" she cried, stumbling forward. The children turned. For one long, unbearable second they stared. Then Clara's face tightened. She didn't run. Neither did June. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out from the side of the house, a coil of rope in his hands. He stopped when he saw her, eyes narrowing. Amelia froze. He wasn't what she expected. Not some backwoods thief or unhinged recluse. He was steady, grounded, and he stood between her and her children like a wall. "I'm looking for my daughters," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "They're inside," he said simply, "resting. I'm their mother." "They told me that," he replied. Eventually, the tension between them thickened. Behind him, Clara took June's hand. Marcus remained close, clearly confused but protective. Amelia wanted to cry, to scream, to run to them, but something in their body language stopped her. Her daughters were safe, but they weren't reaching for her. They weren't smiling. They weren't crying out "Mommy" with joy. They were quiet, guarded. "What did they say?" she asked. "Bits and pieces," he said, "enough to know they were running from something." "They were in a car crash," she said. "Their nanny died. I didn't even know they were gone until—" He nodded. "They told me that, too." She stepped forward. "I want to take them home." The man's jaw tightened. "Maybe you should ask them what they want." "I'm their mother," she snapped, the old authority returning. "And I've been the one keeping them safe," he replied, his voice calm but firm. The wind picked up, rustling the trees around them. In that silence, Clara's voice rang out. "We don't want to go." Amelia turned. Her heart cracked open. "Baby, why not?" "Because you didn't come," Clara said, not moving. "You always said you would, but you didn't. Teresa said you'd be late again, and then the man came. He yelled and scared her. We ran, and then she died." Amelia's knees buckled, and she sank onto the steps. "I didn't know," she whispered. June stepped closer now. "That man said we weren't good enough. He said you'd send us away." "I would never—" But the words caught in her throat. Because hadn't she? In 100 little ways? Hadn't she chosen meetings over bedtime? Strategy calls over school plays? She had convinced herself it was all for them, but maybe, deep down, it had always been for herself, her legacy, her control. The man came closer now, his voice gentler. "I'm Elias," he said. "I didn't know who they were at first. I just found them in the woods, cold and hungry. I did what any father would do." Amelia looked up. "You have a son?" He nodded toward the boy. "Marcus." She studied the child, how easily he stood with her daughters, how comfortable they were, how natural. She felt something twist inside her. "I want to do better," she said quietly. "Then don't take them just yet," Elias said. "Stay. Let them come to you." She blinked. "Stay?" He shrugged. "We've got room. Not fancy, but real." Amelia stared at the house, at her girls, at the man who had protected them when she hadn't been there. Then she nodded. "I'll stay." And for the first time in years, she meant it. The next morning dawned with a softness that seemed out of place, as though the world had decided to hold its breath. The skies were pale and wide, a delicate silver blue stretching over the ranch without urgency, the light filtered and forgiving. In the quiet of the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and yeast drifted through the air as Amelia stood at the wooden counter, her sleeves rolled up, fingers dusted with flour. She moved with an awkward deliberation, as if each gesture were a part of some ritual she hadn't practiced in years. Clara sat nearby on a stool, her arms resting on the table, eyes following her mother with cautious curiosity. Elias entered from outside, boots thudding against the worn floorboards, a bundle of fresh eggs in hand, and the scent of the morning clinging to his clothes. He paused at the threshold for a beat longer than necessary, watching the two of them in that unspoken stillness, as if afraid to break the delicate thread forming between them. "She's trying to make biscuits," Clara announced, her voice a mixture of amusement and mild skepticism. "I can see that," Elias said with a small smile. "They're not burning," Amelia offered without looking up. "Yet." "You're already ahead of some," he replied. "Counter's yours any time you want it." She glanced up then, her mouth tugging into something half like a smile. "Appreciated." Marcus barreled in next, carrying a handful of wildflowers, his hair tousled and cheeks flushed from play. June trailed behind him, giggling, one of his old baseball caps too large on her head. The girls had slept soundly for the first time since returning to the ranch, and the difference in them was subtle but unmistakable. Their movements looser, their glances toward Amelia less wary. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something like permission. Permission for her to try. They sat at the table together, Elias, Amelia, Clara, June, and Marcus, sharing breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. The biscuits weren't perfect. The eggs were slightly overcooked. But none of that mattered. The clatter of cutlery, the soft hum of voices, the way the morning sunlight slid across the floor, it all added up to something rare and precious, something whole. Afterward, the children scattered into the yard again, and Amelia found herself standing on the porch beside Elias, the breeze tugging lightly at the hem of her shirt. She crossed her arms and looked out over the fields, watching the distant specks of the kids as they chased each other near the orchard. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. Elias didn't respond right away. "Neither did I," he said finally. "Not when Rosalind passed. Raising Marcus alone, keeping this place running, it's not something anyone gives you a guidebook for." Amelia nodded slowly. "I keep thinking there's a version of me that would have been a good mother, someone who had time, who didn't get pulled into boardrooms and deadlines. There isn't just one version of you," Elias said. "There's who you were, and there's who you choose to be now." She looked at him then. Do you really think I have a choice anymore? You showed up, he said. That's more than most do. Over the next few days, Amelia stayed. She slept in the guest room, an old sunlit space with quilts folded neatly at the foot of the bed and a window that opened to the scent of pine and dust. She joined them for meals, helped feed the chickens, tried and failed to patch a section of fence with Elias's guidance. She tripped once in the barn and landed in hay, which sent Marcus into fits of laughter and even drew a delighted squeal from June. Amelia had hay in her hair for hours and didn't care. She didn't talk much about her life back in the city, though bits of it slipped through. The pressure, the loneliness, the weight of responsibility and the years spent perfecting an image that never quite felt like hers. Elias listened without judgment. Sometimes they talked late into the evening after the kids had gone to bed, sitting on the porch with mugs of tea, the air thick with cricket song. On the third day, she stood in the hallway and watched as Elias read to the children. They were curled beside him on the couch, Marcus on one side, Clara on the other, June draped across all three of them like a sleepy cat. His voice was low and patient, the cadence steady like a drumbeat in the heart. The girls didn't just listen, they leaned into him, trusted him. Marcus didn't seem to notice anymore that his world had expanded. It just had. Amelia's throat tightened. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the fire was banked, she turned to Elias with a weight in her voice that hadn't been there before. "They love you," she said quietly. "They really love you." "I love them too," he answered. "I know," she said. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full, like a field just before rain. "They never looked at me like that," Amelia said, "even when they were little." "They didn't have a chance to," Elias said, not unkindly. "You were always somewhere else. I'm not saying that to hurt you. It's just true." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I thought I had time to fix it. I always thought there'd be more time." Elias didn't offer false comfort. Instead, he asked, "What do you want to do now?" "I want them to know me," she said, "the real me. Not the one who wears a $1,000 suit and gives interviews about how family values are part of our brand." "Then stay," Elias said simply. "Don't try to fix everything in 1 week. Just stay." But nothing ever stayed untouched by the world forever. That weekend, a black SUV pulled up at the edge of the ranch road. It idled for a moment, then crept forward, its tinted windows reflecting the sky. Elias stepped outside first, every sense alert. Amelia followed him, her breath tight in her chest. 2 men exited the vehicle, one holding a tablet, the other scanning the area like a security guard on high alert. "Miss Duval," the first man said, not greeting Elias at all. "We've been searching for you." "I'm fine," she said, "as are my children. We've been instructed to bring you back. Your absence is starting to impact company operations. The board is concerned. There are pending interviews, appearances, legal obligations." Elias bristled. "This isn't the time." The man barely glanced at him. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if—" Amelia held up a hand. "No." The man blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," she repeated. "You're not taking me anywhere. Not now, not for a while." It's not up for discussion," she said. "You tell the board I'll contact them when I'm ready. Right now I'm spending time with my daughters." The man's expression faltered, but he nodded. "Understood." As the SUV rolled away, leaving only a trail of dust behind, Amelia turned to Elias. "I'm not going back. Not all the way." He looked at her. "You sure?" "I can't pretend anymore," she said. "I lost them once. I won't do it again. I'll find a way to stay connected, do what I have to do, but they're my priority now." And she meant it. That evening, they all sat outside together. Elias, Amelia, Marcus, Clara, and June on the porch as the sun dipped low and fireflies began to spark in the tall grass. The girls leaned into their mother, and she held them like she hadn't in years. Marcus lay on Elias's shoulder, half asleep. It wasn't a perfect picture, but it was real, and for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, it felt like the beginning of something they could call home. The days passed with a strange and unfamiliar quiet, as if time itself had begun to tiptoe around the Carter ranch. The sun rose and set over the rolling fields with patient grace, and the wind whispered secrets through the leaves of the orchard. Within the house, the new rhythm of life settled like dust after a storm, uneven but peaceful. Elias and Amelia began to move around each other in a careful, unspoken harmony. Sometimes they spoke little, other times they spoke much. Most often, it was just enough. Amelia spent long mornings with the girls, walking the edges of the property, helping feed the livestock, reading books in the shade near the creek. Clara had started drawing again, real drawings, not the uncertain scribbles of trauma. June had taken to baking with Mrs. Kennerly, the old neighbor who had quietly folded herself into their little world with a kind of grandmotherly ease. Marcus, as always, moved between them all like a bridge, never quite pushing, never quite needing, simply belonging. But even as the days softened and laughter returned, even as trust began to bloom between Amelia and her daughters, a deeper current stirred beneath the surface. Elias could feel it in the way Clara paused whenever she heard the phone ring, or how June sometimes clung a little too tightly before bed. He felt it in Amelia, too, in the way her hands would shake when no one was watching, or how she stood at the window late at night, staring out toward the road like she was waiting for something or someone. They all knew this couldn't last forever. The world outside the ranch hadn't stopped spinning. Questions lingered. The man Clara had spoken about, the one with the sharp voice and the cruel hands, was still out there. And whoever he was, Elias didn't believe for a second that he had let go. That belief became certainty the day the envelope arrived. It was plain, unmarked, and left in the mailbox without a stamp. Inside was a single photograph, the girls playing in the orchard. It had been taken from a distance, long lens, shaky focus, but there was no mistaking it. The date, scrawled in pencil on the back, was from just 3 days prior. Elias found it first. He said nothing to the children. Instead, he waited until they were asleep, then laid the envelope on the kitchen table and waited for Amelia to come downstairs. When she saw it, she stopped cold. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. "Who would—" "You tell me," Elias said. Amelia's face went still, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Connor." "Who is he?" She sat slowly, the chair creaking beneath her. "Connor Miles. He was my father's legal advisor for years. When my father died, Connor stayed on with the company. He was there when I took control, when I was fighting for custody. He said he believed in my vision, helped me negotiate everything with my ex-husband. When the board turned on me 2 years ago, Connor was the only one who stood by me." "And the girls?" Elias asked. Amelia closed her eyes. "He always acted like he cared about them, but I started seeing things. The way Clara flinched when he was around. How June stopped speaking after he visited us at the lodge last year. I asked Teresa about it. She said he never touched them. But something wasn't right. Teresa promised she'd keep watch. That trip to the mountain house. It wasn't just for fun. She was trying to get them away from him. Elias leaned back, exhaling slowly. And you didn't tell the police. What would I say? Amelia snapped. That I had a feeling? That a powerful man whispered too closely to my children and left shadows in their eyes? There was no proof, just intuition. Sometimes that's enough. Amelia's shoulders slumped. I didn't trust myself. I thought I was imagining it. I didn't act. And Teresa died because of that. They sat in silence, the photograph lying between them like an accusation. You think he knows they're here? Elias asked. I think he's making sure I know that he knows. What does he want? Control, leverage, maybe revenge. Amelia's voice hardened. He wanted power, and I took it from him. Maybe now he thinks he can take them instead. Elias nodded. Then we need to be ready. That night, he walked the perimeter of the ranch, flashlight in hand, his rifle slung across his back. The shadows beneath the trees felt thicker, the wind colder. Every sound made him turn. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Inside the house, Amelia stayed up with Marcus, who had sensed the tension. She didn't lie to him, but she softened the truth. Told him someone was looking for the girls, and they all needed to be cautious. Marcus took the news with quiet determination. I'll keep them safe, he said, his small hands curling into fists. She hugged him hard, her throat aching. The next day, they went to the sheriff. Sheriff Taggart listened carefully, his lined face grim as Amelia laid out what she knew. He looked over the photograph, nodded slowly, and promised to send deputies by the ranch for random patrols, but Elias could see the doubt in his eyes. We'll file the report, Taggart said, but if this man is who you say he is, he'll be careful and smart. We'll be smarter, Elias said. The patrols came once a day, sometimes twice, but they didn't stay long. The ranch was too remote, too quiet, and Connor, whoever he was, did not make his next move immediately. Instead, the unease built in waves. A gate left open one morning that Elias was sure he had latched, a light flickering out suddenly at dusk, though the bulb had just been replaced. Boot prints in the dirt behind the barn, faint but real. Elias and Amelia began taking shifts sleeping, one always awake, one always near the children. Marcus was instructed never to go outside alone. Clara and June clung closer to Amelia now, no longer resisting her touch, no longer watching her from across the room. She had earned that closeness. It wasn't forced. It had been built, painfully, day by day, moment by moment. Then came the second letter. It was slid beneath the door in the middle of the night. Elias found it just after dawn, resting against the threshold like a serpent. There were no photos this time, just a message, typed in clean, cold letters. You can't protect them forever. No signature, no return address, no doubt. Amelia read it in silence, then burned it in the fire. We need to leave, she said, but Elias shook his head. Running won't stop him. He'll follow. As long as he thinks he can scare you into silence, he'll never stop. Then what do we do? She asked. Elias stared into the flames. We make the truth louder than his threats. So they went public. Amelia scheduled an interview, a real one, not a PR puff piece, not a controlled press conference. A raw, unscripted conversation on live national television. She flew into the city alone, her daughters staying at the ranch with Elias under the protection of local deputies. In the studio, beneath bright lights and the gaze of millions, Amelia told the truth about the man who had worked for her family for decades, about her daughter's silence and the fear in their eyes, about the nanny who died trying to protect them, about the guilt that had choked her every night since. She spoke as a mother, not a CEO, and the world listened. Names were named. Evidence followed. Employees came forward. One woman, a former housekeeper, tearfully recounted how Connor had berated and intimidated the staff. Another shared how she'd once found June crying in a bathroom after he'd shouted at her for disrespect. By the end of the week, an arrest warrant had been issued, but Connor had vanished. The relief in Amelia's voice when the warrant was announced was real, but Elias could still hear the undercurrent of fear. A man like that didn't just disappear. He was hiding, waiting, and that meant they weren't safe yet. Still, the air at the ranch shifted. The weight of secrecy had been lifted. The truth had changed things. Clara slept through the night again. June began to sing softly in the barn. Marcus, for the first time in weeks, smiled without hesitation. Elias and Amelia stood outside one evening, watching the children run through the orchard. The trees were beginning to bud again, a promise of spring after a long, hard season. "You did the right thing," Elias said. "I should have done it sooner," she replied. "But you did it," he said. "That's what matters." Amelia looked at him, her eyes searching. "Do you think we'll ever really be safe?" Elias considered this. "I don't know, but we'll face whatever comes. Together." She nodded, and for the first time in a long, long time, she believed him. The wind carried the scent of honeysuckle and dust as the warm breath of early summer swept across the land. The orchard was in bloom again, the trees painted in shades of white and pale pink, their blossoms drifting like snow through the sunlit air. The ranch, still quiet and tucked away from the rush of the outside world, pulsed with a strange sense of waiting. Days passed in steady rhythm, morning chores, meals around the kitchen table, long walks with the children through fields alive with birdsong. But beneath the surface of that routine, something hung unresolved. The danger was not gone, not entirely, and the future remained a question that no one quite dared to answer aloud. Amelia stood in the yard that morning with a watering can in her hands, tending to the line of flowers Marcus had planted along the porch. He had arranged them in a crooked but enthusiastic pattern, claiming they would make the house look less like a cowboy hideout. Elias had laughed at that, tousled the boy's hair, and promised to teach him how to build a real garden box. Now the flowers were blooming defiantly, a small rebellion of color against the plain wood of the house. Inside, Clara and June were drawing on the floor with chalk, their hands smudged and knees scraped. June was humming again, softly and absent-mindedly, a melody she'd made up just days ago. Amelia could hear it from outside. The tune floated through the screen door like a ribbon of light. Elias approached from the pasture, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag and walking with that slow, deliberate pace that belonged to men who had long ago learned not to waste movement. He didn't speak until he was close enough for Amelia to see the tension in his jaw. "They found him," he said simply. Her hand tightened around the watering can. "Where?" "Arizona, Moulton County, old cabin near the border. Tried to bribe a marshal. Got caught." Amelia nodded, then sank onto the porch steps, setting the can down at her feet. "What happens now?" she asked. "He'll be extradited, brought up on charges. There'll be hearings, trials, all the noise that comes with it." Amelia ran a hand through her hair. "And the girls? They don't have to be part of it," Elias said. "Not unless you decide they should be." She looked out toward the pasture where the sun hung high and golden over the hills. "I don't know what I want to do." "You don't have to decide today." But even as he said it, they both knew the decision wasn't just about testifying. It was about what came next. about whether this was a temporary place or a permanent one, whether she and the girls would stay on the ranch or return to the glass towers of Denver, whether they would rebuild their lives among open fields or steel elevators. That night, Amelia didn't sleep. She wandered through the quiet house, her bare feet whispering across the floors, pausing at doorways. She checked on the girls, their faces soft in the moonlight, their breathing steady. She touched their foreheads gently, one after the other, and lingered in the doorway until the ache in her chest grew too tight to hold. She found Elias outside, sitting on the porch steps with a mug of tea in his hands, the rifle resting against the railing beside him like an old friend. The stars were bright above, unfiltered by city lights, bold and endless. He didn't look at her when he spoke. There's a kind of silence out here you don't get anywhere else. I noticed, she said softly. They sat for a while like that, just breathing. I thought it would feel different, she said, finding out he was caught. I thought I'd feel safe, relieved. But you don't. No, I feel like I've run out of excuses. I spent so long blaming the pressure, the company, my father's legacy, my schedule, everything but myself. I told myself I was doing my best, maybe I was, but I wasn't doing enough. Elias turned to look at her now. You're here. I am, but is it enough? He took a long sip of tea before answering. It's not about enough. It's about whether it's real. She met his gaze. And is it? You tell me, he said. The next day, Amelia took the girls into town. It was their first time back among people, among noise and movement and questions. At the diner, familiar faces turned to stare. Some whispered. Others smiled politely, too politely, but Clara and June didn't shrink. They held Amelia's hands and ate their pancakes and talked with Marcus about how many apples they could fit into their backpacks without Elias noticing. At the hardware store, a woman touched Amelia's arm and said, "You're brave." Amelia didn't respond. Brave didn't feel like the right word. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Amelia sat the children down at the table. "I need to ask you something," she said. Clara looked up. "Are we going somewhere?" Amelia nodded. "We have a choice. We could go back to the city, to the life we had before, your old school, your friends, our apartment, or we can stay here, on the ranch. But either way, we do it together." June was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "Can Mr. Elias come too?" Clara squeezed her sister's hand. "I like it here. It's quiet, and I can breathe." Marcus said nothing, just looked at his mother, then at Elias. Amelia looked at Elias. He nodded once. "We stay," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a tearful revelation or a grand gesture. It was just a choice. A decision made in the soft light of evening, around a table marked with scratches and crumbs. But it changed everything. In the weeks that followed, the house changed. Amelia started helping with the accounts for the ranch. She learned how to drive the old tractor. She burned 2 more batches of biscuits and swore she'd never make them again. The girls went fishing with Elias and Marcus. They built a swing from the old tree in the backyard. They carved their initials into the trunk. The trial came and went. Amelia testified briefly. Connor was sentenced. The news faded from headlines, and the world moved on. But the ranch remained, and with it, the life they had chosen. One morning, Clara asked if she could plant a tree. "Why?" Elias asked. "So it can grow up with us," she said. So they planted it together, each one placing a hand on the sapling, pressing it gently into the soil, covering its roots with care. They watered it, named it, promised to protect it. That night, as the stars returned, Elias and Amelia stood beside each other on the porch. "You think we'll make it?" she asked. He took her hand, rough and calloused as it was, and held it gently. "I think we already have." Subscribe for more stories like this. Watch the next video to keep going. Share this one if it meant something to you.